Hello students, Professor Stevenson here. It is our Sunday night wrap up, and this is our final discussion. Very kind of exciting, bittersweet, I guess. I don't know. I've enjoyed all 16 weeks so far, and I think I said to a couple of people on the grading comments, I've genuinely learned from you all, and this class will improve my teaching, so hopefully we've done some good work here. So I am working on grading your annotated bibs, which will take a little while, so bear with me a little bit. I'm hoping to have them back by Friday. That's at least my hope this week. So yeah. But I'm excited to see where you all got on these. And then you all should be wrapping up and turning in your curriculum design portfolios by the following Friday. So by this Friday, right? So I think I gave you till, let me look at the syllabus, sorry, the 10th before midnight. And remember, the format can take many formats. It could be that, you put together some documents. It could be that you've created a website. It could be that you've created a Prezi. But whatever the case, make it something that is useful for you. And then finally, remember, the 3 documents are iterations of what you've put together with your group. They could be the exact same thing, or they could be something different. So maybe your group put something together, but maybe you're the only college teacher in your group, and everyone was teaching high school. So maybe what you did was revise the document a little bit for yourself. And that is completely and utterly fine for me. And the 4th document is something that you've put together yourself. So yeah. Any questions, definitely shoot me those by email, just in case we get, you don't have to ask them on, I know that sometimes I have forgotten to check the hallway conversations or whatever we call it. So if you have a question, the quickest way to get to me is email, and especially on like this sort of really quick last week of classes. So yeah. So let's get into it. The final week of the final discussion, Austin asked some really great questions. I really appreciated him kind of talking in between his questions and explaining where he came from. I will say that, and it's silly scheduling, I will say that the discussion this week wasn't nearly as in-depth as some of the other week's discussion, and I think that it was poor planning on my part, just that there's probably so much to do in this class and other classes, so I'm at least seeing that, and I would imagine that in evaluations I will be hearing that. So I hear you, and luckily you all still said great stuff. So there were a couple of people in the class who had good experience with either veteran students or with, we have Aaron is a veteran himself, and he does do teaching he does some sort of teaching. Now I'm losing it. So he talked about his situation being different and the same all at the same time, is that he has students who join the National Guards or the Marine or the Army their senior year, and on their weekends begin their journey with the military. But that's not the same situation as a 20 or 30-year-old person trying to get back into school. And so he talks about serving 2 tours in Iraq, but rarely lived on an active duty base and having a civilian career. So his experience, he thinks, is a little bit different, but the article, one thing that he points out is that the bottom line is that veterans are adult or learners, and the key factor in their education are the same for adult learners. And like other adult learners, if you allow them to draw on their experiences and work with them as they get started in academics again, their motivation and resiliency will pull them through. And as an instructor, I would encourage them to draw on their experiences as they complete the assignments. That's just good practice anyway, but it's even more important with adult learners. And I thought that was one of the takeaways that I had from the reading as well, is thinking about how your veteran students probably perform jobs in the military that are like really intricate and like important and specialized jobs, but they come back and they have to get this degree path, or if they've chosen to get this degree path. So it could be that, like, one of the things I was talking about with one of my veteran students who was in my business writing classes, we're writing memos, and he's like, yeah, I did that in the military. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And so he kind of talked about that, and actually what he brought into that class was giving the rest of the students a real good perspective on memo writing. So that helped us all. Lori answered the question. She started to talk a little bit more about the sort of scholarly or academic voice. She said she noticed all of the books use this sort of scholarly or academic voice, even while they argue against the inauthentic 5-paragraph essay genre. They write in a genre that consistently interrupts the flow of their argument to name and cite giants of this field. This name-dropping reference will only illuminate the topic for readers who are very knowledgeable and conversant to all the other authors. Because of this class and the required readings, I have finally read some of the landmark texts, and I'm finally beginning to see the connections and influences of these texts. However, I contend that scholarly article genre must be reconceptualized to stop putting a few scholars and select theories on a pedestal. Yeah, I think Lori's definitely onto something. I know that I kind of appreciated going back to the landmark texts. I've been with them and spent a lot of time with them myself. I appreciated going back to them, but at the same time, by the end of the class, I was really digging reading Naming What We Know, the Warner book, and then the articles that were like really practical, like some of the Inside Higher Ed ones. And so for me, thinking about how those things add to the conversation a little bit more helps. And thinking myself as a scholar, like, we're kind of like, yeah, and you all in grad school, we're kind of like, the seminar paper is this genre that like we can't get away from. And I have so many dinosaur seminar papers just sitting around from 2 graduate degrees that like feel like this useless thing. But I wonder if I would have made those into like explainer videos or something like that, if they would feel more useful. So I don't know the answer, but I'm with you, Lori. Like, the scholarly pursuit, it has to get out and reach the public too. Michelle was talking about mental health, and she said, when students believe this, it's safe to assume that they will strive to do their best in core classes. As a composition teacher, this is especially beneficial because learning to write is a core elementary concept in the bigger picture. They must learn to write resumes, essays, memos, business reports correctly, but they will not be able to outsource all of their professional writing. They'll have to do it to some capacity in order to be successful. That being said, what is success? Is it a W-2? Is it a title? I think it's important for educators to stress to their students that success means contentment and happiness. And she goes on to tell the story of a friend. And I think one of the questions, or one of the things I threw back at her, is like, I wonder if this would be like a great assignment for students, knowing that like higher ed is totally, that we're steeped in this, like we're part of student success. At the same time, it's like really, and when I say success, I mean like first year comp is part of success in terms of like succeeding in the university. But also like when students reflect on their education, they're like, gosh, that English 101 class wasn't even useful because they can't articulate it. And maybe they think of success in a different way, or maybe they don't have the career that they want. And I think it's always tough for me to think about that is, you know, you're at this proverbial cocktail party and someone's reflecting on their own journey in higher education. And one of the things they will inevitably get to is either talking about how the class that you teach was completely integral to them or how it was useless to them. And I've heard both, and it, like, I don't know what to say to any of that sometimes. Ethan talks about not having a lot of experience with veterans, but having a friend who, one of the comments he made stuck out to him. He said he wished the professors and other staffs weren't so pitying with him. He said he almost felt singled out when he talked about military experience in classes. So maybe to help veterans feel less like outsiders, we need to treat them more like regular college students. Obviously, we need to understand their unique position and the challenges that veterans have, but I don't think we need to rely on them so much. And like, I think that's also an interesting point about any student that has a unique experience. Like, for example, if you're talking about the military in your class, if you know one of your students was in the military, calling on that person might not be the best way to allow them to speak up. Like, maybe they're really not interested in bringing their military experience into the class. Like, maybe they're fine and they're happy and they're good with it, and they just don't feel like bringing it into the class. So riding the line between like singling out a student and probably with all the good intentions, you're like, oh my gosh, so-and-so has all this amazing experience, but at the same time letting the student be who they are. Like, and then it's also really tricky. I myself have had a couple of students in the military go through like really severe issues during class. So when I have a student who outs themselves as a veteran, my antennas are up, and I'm not trying to say this student's going to have a major problem, but I've had, out of my teaching career, I've had like three veterans who've had like pretty severe and major problems in my class, and not because of me, and clearly things happening personally, and I've had to help them navigate their way to these services. So I think people like me tell maybe horror stories, and not even horror stories, but people like me end up telling stories about how we really need to do better by these students. And to some degree, you know, we can. But I think Ethan makes a good point that, you know, some of the students are just fine and they just want to be seen in a certain light. So really kind of respecting what the student wants and who they are as a person. So I think one of the good strategies here to kind of figure out students is student conferences early in the beginning of school, to discuss, you know, it could be that you're discussing a topic proposal, but you get students in your office and you have a conversation with them about themselves personally. And if they out themselves as a veteran, you ask them, like, what's your comfort level with this in class? Like, if we're talking about military issues or whatever, like, are you comfortable bringing it up in class or whatever? That's just a good, candid way to have that conversation with them. Andrew talked about in college being friends with a few veterans, and the veterans are just like other students. The Hara article stated it well. Higher education seems to treat student veterans as though they come from a vacuum as far as learning is concerned, as though the time they spent between high school and college was a caesura during which learning did not happen. This viewpoint is incorrect. It comes back to everything else we've seen during the semester. Ignorance is the biggest force between you and someone from a different background. The simple answer is, how can we help veterans feel less like outsiders? And Andrew said, to not treat them like outsiders. And I think that's one of the sort of composition theories that's looming in the background is, I don't want to say that maybe it's like cultural pedagogy, but even more based than that is really understand, like if you're interested in, if that's kind of your viewpoint, is to focus on students. Part of your pedagogical belief is that, you treat students in a certain way. So you figure out who they are and you try to bring them into the fold. And I think that's really important for students that come from vulnerable populations, whether it be minority populations or veteran students or working class students, or it could be that you're dealing with, a single mom going back to college. All of these things can be difficult, and all of these people probably see themselves as outsiders to college, because it could be that none of their family members have graduated from college. And so some of these people do a really good job at sort of playing this role, never kind of talking about these things that make their college experience unique. They're trying to be a normal college experience. And some of these people just can't help it because they have maybe other things in their life happening to them while they're experiencing college. So it could be that a single mom is having multiple issues with childcare or an ex or something. It could be that a veteran student is having like tremendous issues trying to get into the VA for healthcare, and they're experiencing,
it's 8 o'clock.
Excuse me, and they're experiencing a serious issue. And all of that just happened to coincide with the semester that they're taking your class. And so thinking of ways in which you can bring them into the fold and help these students if they need it. Christina talked about the job questions. So herself being expected to go to college and pay for herself and expected to figure out afterwards. I don't ever remember thinking or having someone tell me that there was a straight path that I should expect. I know, I was lucky. College was pretty fun, even working 2 20-hour-a-week jobs and living in crumbly Minneapolis brownstones and not owning a car. It was fun because there wasn't so much pressure. I could just go to college without thinking about whether it was a good investment. I understand the college is a career factory sense, that it exists now, and I don't even think it's completely bad. It is sure to focus my college and my students. But the natural outcome is that many students will feel lied to in the end. And then she goes on she teaches, one of the co-recs for her class is a career exploration unit. And she goes on to describe this really interesting assignment that I thought was really good to get students to think about some of these things. And I don't think it's I genuinely think that teaching college after the recession, and then generally teaching in certain areas. So teaching at a large public university, teaching at a community college. You're teaching students who maybe are like when you start reading, and there's other students too. So I'm singling these out, but it could be that a lot of students are just so singularly focused on I'm here to get a job. I'm here to get a job. That when you're, maybe you bring a novel into your composition class, maybe that was a really interesting experience for you. And the student is like, why are we doing this? How is this going to help me get a job? And maybe you can't answer that right away because you're like, well, it's going to help you become a better thinker and writer, and hopefully that'll help you get a job. Allie talked about the same thing. Being frustrating is true, saying the education program that she went through was often discussing her employability and becoming a good teacher for future students. She says that it would be accurate and necessary. She wanted to be employable, find a job, and be hired short after graduation. But she also wanted her instructors to care about me as a person, which I believe most did. Going to a liberal arts school could have affected that, though. I'm not sure how technical or community college schools would be in this element. Yeah, I think that's all very interesting, especially considering when you're in, and maybe some of you can speak to this better, but when you're in teacher training mode, like they're like, we want you, like that's part of it. Is some of the colleges, like their numbers reflect on how well you do. So whether you get a job, and especially like the smaller schools, they're like kind of riding on you too to help them with their numbers. I already talked about the editor question, and she has some really good, interesting experience with editors. She said, I once told one of my students, my favorite part of my job is reading and correcting their essays. She responded by saying, do some of us really make them that interesting? Well, she didn't clearly understand my role as an English teacher means I enjoy this type of work, but mostly I said it because I appreciate the opportunity to hear individuals' voices on the topic of choice. When I grade my students' papers, I also edit them grammatically. I do them because I want them to be aware of where simple errors are in hopes to improve their writing. Although, to be honest, when I was a student in college, I rarely took the time to focus on simple grammatical errors, and my professors marked out for me on graded essays. Therefore, she's not really sure how often her students are doing these. But then she goes on to talk about how she's had editors in non-teaching positions, writing for a couple of newspapers, and thank God for the editors because they clearly knew more than I did at the time. One time an editor changed my headline altogether, and I remember appreciating this. I've also had editors that I've hired to edit my first, second draft novels. In a lot of ways, what Austin said is true. The editor has the power over the writer. I don't think I ever would have found myself qualified enough to edit until I became a full-time English teacher myself. Yeah, I think also, too, I've become a better writer as a better teacher because I'm reading, I think that, I don't know, I'm the same way. I haven't been hired to do editing work, but I also haven't sought it out. But I think I'm like, after 12 years of teaching, I think I'm finally qualified to, I think I would finally feel comfortable doing editing work, which says a lot. Dana has a lot of really specific experience with her husband in the military, and if you get a chance, take a second to read this. I want to talk a little bit about how she talks about the transition from military to civilian life. So she said, veterans who straddle the line between military and civilian life are more prone to feel like an outsider, much more than those who are full-time living on a military base. For a long time, most branches of the military failed to see how difficult the transition for soldiers and families to be repeatedly and periodically moving in and out of civilian and military life. My husband has been on several deployments, and we were so ill-prepared it almost ended our marriage the first time around. That things matter to me and the kids seem trivial and unimportant. There are secrets like combat badge I didn't know he had until a few years. And she goes on later on, and she says, for military students in general, since I haven't taught veterans, I try to follow their lead as I would with students from other cultures. I privately acknowledge their service, but I'm careful not to assume that they want to write about it all the time or even talk about it. Some students need to write and talk about it, and I'm awful careful to add a disclaimer on what I talk about related to my husband's service and my experience as a military spouse. And again, she goes on much longer, but I think that she has a really interesting story and a unique perspective. And I think she is right to really talk about how she would treat veteran students. I think I talked about that a couple minutes ago as both, if they're there to write about, if they want to write about their experience, great. If they don't want to write about their experience, great. And I think so in my first couple of years as a teacher, Leslie Marmon Silko came to one of the community colleges I was adjuncting at. And the one book for the community college was Ceremony, and it's about I'm forgetting the plot line, but there's definitely military service, and there are Native American veterans. And two of the students in my one class, one of them couldn't continue going to class because of the issues it brought up for him. And this was back in 2009, and the campuses have become better equipped to deal with veterans, but they weren't bad back then, but they weren't awesome. And so one of the students like literally couldn't continue to come to class, and the other one, because the writing assignments weren't about your service, but they were definitely about the topics in there. One of them had to have an alternate writing assignment because all of this stuff was just way too close to them. And so it was just really difficult. One of them actually had to go on a special deployment in the middle of my class, and was like, you get pretty, like, in your college classes, sometimes you get pretty clear instructions, and especially as an adjunct and somebody who hasn't taught that much, but what to do if a student hasn't attended more than a certain number of classes. You drop them, you give them an F. They're like, depending on where you teach in whatever department. I got a call from a dean that was like, this is how we're going to handle it. And they basically told me what we're doing, which was really weird. But that happened, and that was one of my specific experiences that I was like, oh, okay, this must have been very serious. And again, like I said, the student, like, I'm always curious about this student, and I'd like to contact him today, because he was having such severe issues dealing in my class with the topic, and then he was pulled to go on a certain really special deployment, and I was just kind of, I told the dean I was kind of concerned for him, and the dean said, well, it's out of our hands now. And I said, okay. So I hope that he got any help that he needed. Amy talked about giving practice assignments that are challenging, that may seem, so on the question of giving assignments that students are asked, that students blow on purpose or that are really hard, Amy talks about doing this one that's a mighty mini assignment that really kind of it sounds like what she's talking about is that it really tests the student's muscle, and she is aware of it, but she still thinks it's important, and that it turns out to be a learning, I think that the way she puts it is that it turns out to be a learning experience for students, and so that for her, she feels justified in assigning it, even though she kind of knows a lot of the students are going to blow it, because it's such an incredible learning experience for students, and she's not making it a high stakes assessment. So I think in my comments to Amy, I was like, I actually don't think that you're doing anything wrong here in any capacity. I know that, we don't ever want to set our students up for failure, but it sounds like you're really mindful of how the students could take it. And Ashley talked about talking about that it's perfectly accept that introducing students to the value of unexpected outcomes and how they can contribute to their successes. For example, through the writing process, they made a taste of this truth by continually trying and failing and drafting and revising before achieving success in their papers assignments. This could parallel to any future successes they accomplish in their schooling, job training, and lifetimes. So, like, bringing it back to naming what we know, one of the sort of little maxims about writing was that writing is hard. And I think the more that not that we challenge our students unnecessarily, but I think the more that we explain to students and give them examples that writing is hard, the more that they're going to understand that the process is there to help them. That we have teachers have like little hacks to make these easier. So like one of them is like outlining, right? Simple. And most of the time, not most of the time, some of the students like get really like, oh, why do we have to outline it? Well, you have to outline it because it makes this whole thing less difficult. Why do we have to like bring in our first paragraph and get another pair of eyes on it? Because this makes this things easier. It makes writing easier because so-and-so can tell you like you're way off track and you need to start over, right? So all of these things that they learn process-wise in our first year writing classes are design functions to help them deal with the difficulty of writing. So, all right. Well, this is our last discussion. I haven't completely. I would like to record like one final wrap up to you all. Maybe kind of pulling some major points through, but then again, that sounds completely impossible at this point. But I will come back at you with something on next Sunday night. Again, great work so far. You all are working on one last thing. Any questions that you have, please direct them to me via email. Thank you.